world to look like in 5-10 years time? As I mentioned earlier on, you got AI and you got the Apple Vision Pro, and eventually they're going to come out with sunglasses like the ones you're wearing now that have every little thing that you need to see in front of you. So what do you imagine the world to look like? Is it a scary place, or is it a thing of where it's interesting?
It's a good question. And I'm going to tell people how I came to my answer. I think the best way to predict the future is to study history. I believe in times of old, let's go back the last 3,000 years. If you were a king, your life was pretty good. Or it was as good as life could be. To be a king, you had power, influence, money. That's what you had, and you were a king, and you lived a good version of life. If you weren't a king, you were an average man, a common man. Mm-hmm. And I think the world is cyclical. When you were a common man 2,000 years ago, you were effectively a slave, and life was terrible. And then that was the same all the way up to perhaps the 1930s, 1940s. Being a common man was pretty terrible. And perhaps it was the war and the massive loss of life. Perhaps it was something else, I'm not sure. But I kind of feel like there was a golden period between in the 50s to 60s to 70s to 80s, maybe even the 90s, where being a normal, hardworking man, because life is cyclical, went from being a terrible existence to quite a good existence. In the 60s, you could be a normal man who worked in a factory, an unskilled labor job, and with one wage, you could afford a house, you could afford a car, you could afford to raise a family, your children would not be taught garbage in school, your wife would respect you, you'd have a home-cooked meal.
Times were good.
Times were good. All the things I said about playing Uno earlier in Hyperbole are true. What matters most? Your wife loves you. You're respected as the breadwinner. Your kids respect you. They listen to you. Mm-hmm. Your house is clean. Your house is safe. Your car works. Your life is good. And I feel like because it's cyclical, those good times are over and we're going back to where it was before. The kings have always been fine, and we always will. But if you're the common man, I think that the good days are over. And I think it's going to get harder and harder. Inflation is going to absolutely decimate your spending power. Now, inflation doesn't damage me. Inflation doesn't damage me because I own all the assets. Inflation just means houses get worth more money. Inflation just means Bitcoin and stock and land and houses all go up. Inflation means my car collection is no longer worth 110 million. It's now worth 300 million. Whatever. I own everything.
Inflation is amazing for the rich man.
100%. I love it.
But for the broke man,
you're done.
You're fit.
You're done.
You're finished.
Because inflation is meaning your money is worth less. And it's going to take more of your money to buy a house. And your wage is not going to increase at the rate of inflation. And it's becoming more and more impossible for you to own assets. For us,